In the heart of Rome, as the sun sets and the eternal city prepares for night, there exists a place where time seems to flow differently. Here, in the gathering darkness, let us begin our journey through the smallest sovereign state in the world, a nation so minute it could be walked across in less than an hour. Yet one whose influence has shaped empires and moved the course of human history for millennia. The Vatican City, merely 44 hectares of lands, smaller than many urban parks, yet containing within its ancient walls the spiritual headquarters of over 1 billion faithful souls spread across every continent. A paradox of earthly existence. Immense power concentrated in the tiniest of spaces. As the streets of Rome grow quiet and the warm Italian air cools with the coming night, we approach the borders of this miniature nation, a place where the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual, between the ancient and the modern, between earth and heaven seem unusually thin. Listen closely as our footsteps change their sound, moving from the rough cobblestones of Rome to the smooth, polished marble of Vatican territory. The echo shifts longer, deeper, more resonant, as if the very stone beneath our feet acknowledges we have crossed into a different realm altogether. The air here carries different scents than the Rome we leave behind. Gone are the aromas of espresso and motor scooters, of restaurant kitchens and modern city life. Here, the atmosphere is perfumed with beeswax candles that have burned continuously for centuries, with ancient leather-bound books, with the lingering traces of incense that has risen in the same sacred spaces since before Columbus sailed for the New World. As night fully embraces this tiny country, most visitors have departed. The great museums have closed their doors. The basilica stands silent, except for the occasional whispered prayer. This is when the Vatican reveals its true nature, not as a tourist attraction or museum complex, but as a living, breathing spiritual entity that has survived the rise and fall of countless political powers. In these quiet hours, we begin our exploration, not merely of a place, but of a phenomena, sovereign territory that defies modern conceptions of what constitutes a nation. A country without births, for no maternity hospitals exist within its borders. A monarchy where the crown passes not by bloodline, but by election among elders. A state whose primary purpose is not commerce or military might, but the preservation and promulgation of faith. The night air grows cooler still as we stand in the vastness of St. Peter's Square. Above us, the dome of the basilica rises like a mountain against the star-strewn sky, testament to human ambition reaching toward divine aspiration. The colonnades stretch out like great arms, embracing the empty plaza where tomorrow thousands will gather, but tonight belongs to silence and contemplation. Listen, in the distance, the soft tolling of bells marks the passage of hours, as they have done for centuries. Time moves differently here, measured not in minutes and hours, but in papacies and jubilees, in holy years and councils. The weight of 2,000 years of continuous history presses down upon every stone, every statue, every shadow. Our journey through this remarkable place will take us deep into its paradoxes. How something so small can wield such enormous influence. How ancient traditions adapt to modern realities. How spiritual authority manifests in temporal power. We will walk the corridors of the Apostolic Palace, stand beneath Michelangelo's masterpieces, and descend into the necropolis, where it all began with the burial of a humble fisherman from Galilee. But first, we must understand that we are entering not just a physical place, but a concept, an idea that has outlasted empires and survived revolutions. The Vatican is both less and more than a country, is the physical manifestation of one of humanity's oldest continuous institutions. As the cool night deepens, and the sounds of Rome fade into the distance. We find ourselves at the beginning of our exploration at the seed from which this extraordinary entity grew. For to understand the Vatican of today, we must first travel back nearly 2 millennia, to the time when the Eternal City was the center of a vast pagan empire, and the followers of a recently executed Jewish teacher were a persecuted minority hiding in the shadows. Our story begins with death, the martyrdom of a man named Simon Peter, on a Vatican hill that was then at the edge of ancient Rome, a place of execution and burial, far from the city's heart. The year was approximately 64 CE. During the reign of Emperor Nero, Peter, once a fisherman from Galilee, had become the leader of a small but growing sect of believers in Jesus of Nazareth. According to tradition, he was crucified upside down, declaring himself unworthy to die in the same manner as his master. His followers, at great personal risk, recovered his body and buried it on the Vatican Hill, marking the grave as best they could. That humble grave, that seed planted in Roman soil would, over centuries, grow into the mighty oak that is St. Peter's Basilica, and eventually the sovereign Vatican city-state. For nearly 3 centuries, the followers of this faith remained persecuted, gathering in homes and catacombs, their worship hidden from imperial authorities. The site of Peter's burial became a place of pilgrimage, marked only by a simple memorial, visited in secret by those who shared his faith. But the world was changing. The Roman Empire, after centuries of pagan rule, was about to undergo a transformation that would forever alter the course of Western civilization. The air in the present-day basilica seems to grow heavier, more still, as we contemplate these distant origins. The echo of our footsteps fades to nothing as we stand, mentally transported to those early days of persecution and hidden faith. The marble and gold that surround us now were then unimaginable dreams. The mighty dome under which we stand was then only empty air above a lonely grave. In the year 312 CE, a momentous battle took place at the Milvian Bridge, just north of Rome. The Emperor Constantine, facing a rival claimant to the throne, reportedly saw a visionary cross in the sky with the words in this sign, "Conquer." He ordered his soldiers to paint Christian symbols on their shields. They were victorious. The following year, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity throughout the empire, and soon after, he began construction of the first St. Peter's Basilica directly over the site where tradition held that the apostle was buried. This first basilica was not the Renaissance masterpiece we know today. It was built in the style of a Roman public building, a rectangular structure with colonnaded aisles, a wooden roof, and an altar positioned above what was believed to be Peter's tomb for the first time. What had been a secret shrine became a public monument, a statement written in stone and mortar that the once persecuted faith was now embraced by imperial power. As we stand in the present-day basilica, with its soaring dome and lavish decoration, it requires an effort of imagination to envision that first, more modest structure. Yet, for more than 1,000 years, it was this Constantinian basilica that stood on this spot, witnessing the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the rise of the medieval papacy, the coronation of Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day in the year 800, and countless other momentous events. The cool night air within today's basilica seems to whisper with the echoes of those distant centuries. The silent stones around us have seen the transformation of a small Jewish sect into the dominant religious and political force in Western Europe. But our story is just beginning. For the Vatican, as we know it today, the sovereign city-state would not come into existence for many centuries. First, there would be the rise and fall of the papal states, a large territory in central Italy ruled directly by the popes as temporal monarchs. The origins of papal territorial rule are complex, emerging gradually from the political vacuum left by the collapse of Roman authority in the West. As imperial power receded, the bishops of Rome, the popes, increasingly took on civic responsibilities, protecting the city from invaders, maintaining infrastructure, and administering justice. The formal creation of the papal states is usually dated to the 8th century, when Pepin the Short, king of the Franks, defeated the Lombards, who threatened Rome and restored captured territories to papal control. This donation of Pepin established the popes as territorial rulers over much of central Italy. For the next 1,000 years, the popes would rule not just as spiritual leaders, but as temporal monarchs over a significant Italian territory stretching from Rome to Ravenna, encompassing fertile lands, important cities, and strategic ports. The marble beneath our feet seems to cool further as we contemplate this long arc of history. The sound of our breathing echoes softly against walls that have witnessed the rise and fall of papal temporal power. Power that would eventually be reduced to the tiny territory we now explore. In the vast silence of the nighttime basilica, one can almost hear the distant echoes of papal courts, of armies marching under the banner of the crossed keys, of diplomatic negotiations and political intrigues that once emanated from these precincts when the Pope's writ ran not just over souls, but over substantial, earthly territories. As we move through the darkened basilica, our path illuminated only by the flickering of votive candles and the distant glow of security lights, we approach the very center of this sacred space, the papal altar, with its towering bronze baldachin or canopy, created by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Below this altar, according to tradition, lie the remains of Peter himself, the rock upon which this entire edifice, both physical and spiritual, was built. The current basilica that surrounds us is not the original built by Constantine. That ancient structure, after standing for more than a millennium, had begun to show its age. In 1506, Pope Julius II made the momentous decision to demolish the old basilica and build a new, grander one in its place. The construction of the present St. Peter's Basilica would span the tenure of 21 popes and the genius of multiple architects, including Bramante, Raphael, and Michelangelo, who designed its iconic dome. It was finally completed and consecrated in 1626, 120 years after construction began. As we stand beneath this architectural marvel, it's worth remembering that its construction coincided with one of the most tumultuous periods in church history, the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Indeed, it was partly to fund this ambitious building project that the Church increased its sale of indulgences, a practice that would become one of Martin Luther's chief complaints when he nailed his 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Castle Church in 1517. The night deepens around us as we contemplate these layers of history. The basilica breathes silently, its vast spaces holding centuries of prayers, coronations, canonizations, and solemn masses. The smell of beeswax and incense seems more pronounced now, as if the thinning crowds have allowed these ancient scents to reassert themselves. But we have jumped ahead in our narrative. For to understand the Vatican as it exists today, the sovereign microstate, established in 1929, we must return to the story of the Papal States and trace their dissolution. For a millennium, the popes ruled as temporal monarchs over their Italian territories. But the 19th century brought revolutionary changes to the Italian peninsula. The movement for Italian unification, the Risorgimento, sought to bring the various Italian states together into a single nation. This nationalist movement, led by figures like Giuseppe Garibaldi and Count Camillo Benso di Cavour, inevitably clashed with papal territorial rule. In 1860, most of the papal states were annexed by the newly formed Kingdom of Italy. By 1870, only Rome and a small surrounding area remained under papal control. Then, on September 20th, 1870, Italian troops entered Rome through a breach in the walls near Porta Pia. The millennial temporal power of the papacy over extensive territories was reduced to the Pope's spiritual authority and his physical control over a few buildings in Rome. Pope Pius IX and his successors refused to recognize the legitimacy of the Italian state's actions. They considered themselves prisoners in the Vatican, not leaving the papal precincts for the next 59 years. This standoff between the papacy and the Italian state became known as the Roman Question. As we move from the basilica into the quieter corridors of the Vatican, the weight of this historical moment seems palpable. For nearly 6 decades, popes lived in self-imposed confinement within these walls, refusing to set foot on Italian soil, refusing to accept what they saw as the illegal seizure of divinely ordained papal territories. The soft sound of our footsteps on marble floors echoes through hallways where popes once paced, contemplating their reduced circumstances, maintaining their claim to lost lands, and refusing all financial compensation offered by the Italian government. This impasse would continue until 1929, when a solution was finally negotiated between Pope Pius XI and the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. The resulting agreements, known as the Lateran Treaty and Concordat, created the modern Vatican City-State and normalized relations between Italy and the Holy See. The air in these midnight corridors feels charged with the significance of that moment, the birth of the smallest sovereign state in the world. A nation measuring just 44 hectares, 109 acres, with a perimeter of only 2 kilometers, 2 miles, a country smaller than New York's Central Park, yet recognized internationally as a sovereign entity with all the rights and privileges of nationhood. Under the terms of the Lateran Treaty, Italy recognized the full sovereignty of the Holy See over this tiny territory, which included St. Peter's Basilica and Square, the Vatican Palace and Gardens, and a few buildings in Rome outside the Vatican proper. In return, the Holy See recognized the Kingdom of Italy with Rome as its capital and received financial compensation for the loss of the Papal States. This miniature nation was granted all the trappings of sovereignty, the right to send and receive diplomatic representatives, to issue its own currency and stamps, to operate its own media outlets, and to control its borders. A nation in miniature was born, or rather reborn, in drastically reduced form. As we traverse the silent corridors and courtyards of this tiny state, we begin to comprehend the fascinating paradox of the Vaticana. Political entity so small it can be walked across in 20 minutes, yet one whose spiritual authority extends to the furthest corners of the earth. The night has deepened around us. The tourists are long gone. Only the occasional Swiss guard stands at attention, their colorful Renaissance uniforms now shadowed in the dim lighting, the metal of their halberds occasionally catching and reflecting what little illumination remains. These guards themselves are part of the fascinating story of this microstate. The Pontifical Swiss Guard, founded in 1506, is one of the oldest military units in continuous operation. Their primary role today is the protection of the Pope and the Apostolic Palace. Their distinctive uniforms, contrary to popular belief, were not designed by Michelangelo but were introduced in the early 20th century. Inspired by depictions in Renaissance art, every guard must be a single, Catholic, Swiss male citizen who has completed basic training with the Swiss Armed Forces. They serve for a minimum of 2 years, living within the Vatican walls. Their ceremonial language is Swiss German, but they must also learn Italian. As we pass a guard standing motionless at his post, we can discern the modern pistol holstered at his side, reminder that despite their Renaissance appearance, they are a functioning security force with modern training and equipment. The Swiss Guard represents just one aspect of how this tiny state functions as a sovereign entity. Despite its minuscule size, the Vatican possesses all the necessary elements of a functioning country, albeit in miniature form. The governance structure of Vatican City is unique among nations. It is an absolute elective monarchy, with the Pope serving as both spiritual leader of the Catholic Church and sovereign of the Vatican City-State. Unlike hereditary monarchies, the papal office is filled through election by the College of Cardinals when a vacancy occurs. The legislative authority for the state rests with the Pontifical Commission for Vatican City-State, appointed by the Pope for 5-year terms. Day-to-day governance is delegated to various administrative offices that manage everything from security to finances to maintenance of the extensive art collections. As we move through the silent administrative offices, closed and darkened for the night, we can sense the dual nature of the Vatican bureaucracy serving both the spiritual mission of the Catholic Church and the practical needs of a sovereign territory. The population of this unique microstate fluctuates around 800 people, none of whom are permanent citizens in the conventional sense. Vatican citizenship is not acquired by birth but by appointment, and it is held only for the duration of one's service to the Holy See. When that service ends, citizenship reverts to one's original nationality. The cool night air carries the distant sound of a clock chiming the hour, one of the many timepieces that mark the passing of hours in this ancient place. Time itself seems different here, measured not just in minutes and days, but in papacies and centuries, in councils and synods, in the slow evolution of doctrine and tradition. Now, as midnight approaches, let us delve deeper into how this remarkable microstate functions. For despite its tiny size, the Vatican operates many of the services one would expect from a sovereign nation: a post office, a pharmacy, a supermarket, a bank, and even a small radio station. The Vatican Post Office, often noted for its efficiency, processes more mail per capita than any other postal system in the world. Many Romans cross the border just to mail letters and packages, knowing they will reach their destinations more quickly than if sent through the Italian postal service. The Vatican Bank, officially the Institute for the Works of Religion, manages assets for religious orders and Catholic institutions worldwide. Over the years, it has been the subject of numerous controversies and reforms. A reminder that even in this spiritual center, worldly concerns of finance and governance cannot be escaped. Vatican Radio, founded in 1931 with the assistance of Guglielmo Marconi himself, the inventor of radio, broadcasts in multiple languages and reaches faithful listeners around the globe. It represents just one aspect of the Vatican's media operations, which have expanded in recent years to include a website, a YouTube channel, and various social media presences. Even as we contemplate these modern aspects of Vatican operations, our senses remain attuned to the ancient nature of our surroundings. The echo of footsteps on marble, the coolness of stone walls that have stood for centuries, the faint scent of beeswax and incense that permeates everything. These sensory experiences connect us to the long continuum of history that flows through this place. As we pass through a courtyard open to the night sky, we pause to look up at the stars visible above the high walls. The same stars shone down on this spot when it was a circus where ancient Romans held chariot races, when it was the site of Nero's persecutions of early Christians, when Constantine's workmen laid the foundations of the first basilica, when Renaissance masters directed the construction of the current one. The weight of history here is almost palpably upon layer of human striving, of artistic genius, of political calculation, of spiritual devotion. Few places on earth contain such a concentration of historical significance in such a small area. Let us now direct our nighttime exploration toward one of the most fascinating aspects of Vatican City: the vast repositories of knowledge and art contained within its walls. For this tiny state is, among other things, one of the world's greatest custodians of cultural heritage. The Vatican Museums, founded in the early 16th century, comprise one of the largest museum complexes in the world, with over 70,000 works on display out of a collection of more than 200,000 pieces. In daylight hours, thousands of visitors queue to view these treasures. Now, in the silence of night, the artworks rest in darkness, seen only by the occasional security guard making rounds. The museums include not just religious art, but ancient Roman sculptures, Egyptian mummies, Etruscan artifacts, and modern works. This vast collection speaks to the Church's role as a patron of the arts throughout centuries, and as a preserver of cultural heritage even from non-Christian civilizations. Perhaps most famous among the Vatican's artistic treasures is the Sistine Chapel, with its ceiling frescoes by Michelangelo depicting scenes from Genesis and his powerful Last Judgment on the altar wall. Completed between 1508 and 1512, the ceiling represents one of the towering achievements of Renaissance art. The night silence in the chapel now is profound, a stark contrast to the daytime hours when hundreds of visitors crane their necks upward, speaking in hushed tones despite repeated requests for silence from the guards. In this midnight emptiness, one can almost imagine Michelangelo himself working by lamplight on his scaffolding, his body aching, his vision strained, driven by both artistic ambition and spiritual purpose. Beyond art, the Vatican is also the custodian of one of the world's most significant collections of written knowledge. The Vatican Apostolic Library, founded in 1475, contains over 75,000 codices, 1 million printed books, and an extensive collection of coins, medals, and other artifacts. The Vatican's secret archives, more accurately translated as the private archives, contain documents spanning more than 12 centuries. Despite conspiracy theories about hidden knowledge, the archives are actually open to qualified researchers. However, the sheer volume of material shelving that would stretch over 85 kilometers, 53 miles, if placed in a single line, means that many documents remain understudied. As we move through the silent corridors that lead to these repositories of knowledge, the air grows cooler still, maintained at specific temperature and humidity levels to preserve the ancient manuscripts and documents. Here, in climate-controlled rooms, rest papers touched by the hands of kings and queens, of saints and sinners, of artists and scientists whose ideas shaped the modern world. Letters from Henry VIII of England regarding his desired annulment, documents from the trial of Galileo Galilei, correspondence from Abraham Lincoln to Pope Pius IX, and countless other historical treasures reside within these walls. Testament to the Vatican's role as witness to and participant in the flow of Western history. The preservation of these materials requires specialized knowledge and technology. Vatican conservators work constantly to protect fragile documents from the ravages of time, using both ancient techniques passed down through generations and cutting-edge scientific methods. This blend of tradition and innovation characterizes much of how the Vatican functions. As our nighttime journey continues, let us turn our attention to the heart of Vatican governance, the Apostolic Palace, the official residence of the Pope, though the current Pope, Francis, chose to live in the more modest Casa Santa Marta guest house rather than the papal apartments the palace remains the center of church administration. Within these walls, decisions are made that affect the spiritual lives of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. The structure of Vatican governance is complex, with various congregations, councils, and offices collectively known as the Roman Curia handling different aspects of church administration. The Secretariat of State, led by the Cardinal Secretary of State, functions somewhat like a Prime Minister's office, coordinating the work of the Curia and managing diplomatic relations with other countries. The Vatican maintains diplomatic relations with over 180 nations, an extensive network for such a tiny state. Various congregations focus on specific aspects of church life doctrine, worship, causes of saints, clergy, Catholic education, and more. These bodies, led by cardinals appointed by the Pope, function somewhat like government ministries, developing policies and responding to issues that arise throughout the global church. The night air within these administrative corridors carries the faint scent of paper and ink, of wooden furniture polished by generations of careful hands, of the subtle perfume of beeswax candles that still illuminates certain ceremonies despite the advent of electric lighting. Here, in offices that appear little changed from centuries ago, though now equipped with computers and modern communications technology, work proceeds in a rhythm that blends ancient tradition with contemporary necessity. Latin remains the official language of Vatican documents, though Italian is the working language of daily business. The sound of our footsteps changes again as we move from marble floors to areas covered with thick carpets, designed to muffle noise near the rooms where important meetings take place. The walls here are often adorned with Renaissance art, not museum pieces, but working decorations, part of the living environment of Vatican governance. As midnight passes and we enter the deepest hours of the night, let us direct our exploration to one of the most distinctive aspects of Vatican operations, its unique economy. The Vatican city-state has no natural resources, minimal agricultural production limited to the Vatican gardens, and no manufacturing to speak of. Its economy is perhaps the most unusual of any recognized sovereign entity. Income for the Vatican comes from multiple sources. The Institute for the Works of Religion, the Vatican Bank, manages assets for religious orders and Catholic institutions. The Vatican museums generate significant revenue from millions of annual visitors. The sale of postage stamps, coins, and publications provides additional income. Worldwide donations to the Pope's personal charitable fund, Peter's Pence, support specific humanitarian initiatives. Despite popular misconceptions about vast wealth, the Vatican often operates with a budget deficit. The maintenance of ancient buildings, the conservation of artistic treasures, the operation of global media services, and support for charitable works worldwide create substantial expenses. The economy of this microstate operates on principles somewhat different from conventional nations. Profit is not the primary motive. Rather, the goal is the sustainability of the physical infrastructure that supports the Church's spiritual and charitable mission. As we pass the darkened windows of the Vatican pharmacy, renowned for offering medications at prices lower than those found in Italian pharmacies, we contemplate this unique economic system, neither fully capitalist nor socialist, but operating according to its own principles of stewardship and service. Near the pharmacy stands the Vatican supermarket, closed at this hour but during the day offering tax-free groceries and goods to those with Vatican credentials. The absence of taxation is another distinctive feature of this sovereign entity. Though a customs union with Italy means there are no border checks for goods moving between the Vatican and its Italian surroundings, the night has grown deeper still. The occasional sound of a security guard's footsteps or the distant call of an owl in the Vatican gardens punctuates the profound silence. In these quiet hours, one can almost hear the breathing of the ancient stones themselves, witnesses to centuries of human drama, devotion, and decision-making. Let us now turn our attention to one of the most solemn and significant events in Vatican life, the transition of papal power. Unlike most monarchies, the Vatican's leadership changes not through hereditary succession, but through an election following the death or resignation of a pope. The process begins with the vacancy of the papal office, traditionally through death. Though in 2013, the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI demonstrated that voluntary abdication, while extremely rare, remains possible under canon law. When the papal office becomes vacant, the Cardinal Camerlengo Chamberlain officially confirms the death or acceptance of resignation. In the case of death, ancient rituals are observed. The Pope's ring, the fisherman's ring, is ceremonially destroyed to prevent the fraudulent authorization of documents. The governance of the Church during this interregnum period falls to the College of Cardinals, though their power is limited to maintaining ordinary operations rather than making significant new decisions. Within 15 to 20 days, the cardinals under the age of 80 gather in Rome for the conclave election process for a new pope. The term conclave derives from the Latin conclave, meaning with a key, referring to the locked nature of the proceedings. The cardinals are sequestered within the Sistine Chapel, cut off from outside communication until they reach a decision. The voting process is steeped in tradition. Each cardinal writes his choice on a ballot paper, folds it, and places it in a chalice on the altar. The ballots are counted, and if no candidate receives a 2/3 majority, the papers are burned with chemical additives that produce black smoke, visible to the waiting crowds in St. Peter's Square. When a candidate finally receives the required majority, the ballots are burned with chemicals producing white smoke, the signal to the world that a new pope has been elected. The cardinal protodeacon then appears on the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and announces to the waiting crowd, "Hobamus popum, we have a pope," followed by the name of the cardinal who has been elected and the papal name he has chosen. As we stand in the empty expanse of St. Peter's Square, we can almost visualize these momentous scenes, the anxious crowds watching for smoke signals, the roar that goes up when white smoke appears, the hushed anticipation as they wait to learn who will lead the Catholic Church in the years to come. This ancient electoral process, one of the oldest in the world still in operation, represents yet another fascinating paradox of the Vatican. Deeply traditional methods being used to select the leader of an institution that must constantly engage with the modern world and its rapidly evolving challenges. The deepest hours of the night have now arrived. The Vatican sleeps, though never completely. Security personnel remain vigilant, and somewhere within these walls, monks or nuns maintain the tradition of perpetual adoration, ensuring that prayer continues uninterrupted throughout the night. Let us use these quiet hours to reflect on one of the most significant aspects of the Vatican's functioning, its diplomatic role on the world stage. Despite its tiny size, the Holy See, the episcopal jurisdiction of the Catholic Church in Rome, which is distinct from but closely associated with Vatican City-State, maintains one of the world's most extensive diplomatic networks. The Holy See currently maintains diplomatic relations with over 180 sovereign states, as well as the European Union, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, and organizations like the United Nations, where it holds permanent observer status. Its diplomatic corps, among the oldest in the world, continues a tradition that predates the modern concept of nation-states. Vatican diplomacy operates according to principles somewhat different from those of secular powers. With no military forces apart from the ceremonial Swiss Guard and minimal economic leverage, the Holy See relies on moral authority and its unique position as both a religious and political entity to pursue its diplomatic objectives. These objectives typically center on issues such as religious freedom, human rights, assistance to refugees and migrants, conflict resolution, nuclear disarmament, and development for impoverished nations. The Vatican's diplomatic interventions often focus on humanitarian concerns rather than geopolitical advantage. Papal trips abroad are a relatively recent innovation in church history, becoming common only in the latter half of the 20th centuries, serve both religious and diplomatic purposes. When a pope visits a nation, he functions both as a spiritual leader for local Catholics and as a head of state meeting with government officials. As we contemplate this diplomatic role from the silent darkness of St. Peter's Square, we can appreciate how the Vatican's unique dual nature, spiritual authority and political entity, allows it to operate in international relations in ways unavailable to conventional nation-states. The night sky above the square is beginning to show the first faint signs of approaching dawn. Stars still dominate the heavens, but there is a subtle lightening at the eastern horizon. Our exploration of this remarkable microstate has covered much ground, but there remain aspects of Vatican functioning we have yet to examine. Let us turn our attention now to the daily life within these ancient walls, the routine operations that keep this sovereign entity functioning. For despite its spiritual mission and artistic treasures, the Vatican is also a workplace for approximately 3,000 people, most of whom commute daily from homes in Rome and surrounding areas. The majority of Vatican employees are Italian, though a significant number come from other countries, particularly for roles within the Roman Curia that address global church governance. Positions range from gardeners and maintenance workers to highly specialized art restorers, from postal clerks to diplomatic staff, from security personnel to theologians. Employment at the Vatican comes with certain unique characteristics. Salaries are generally lower than equivalent positions in the Italian private sector, but include benefits such as tax exemption, access to the Vatican supermarket and pharmacy with their reduced prices, and a certain prestige associated with service to the Holy See. The workday typically begins early, with most offices opening around 8 a.m. A distinctive feature of the Vatican schedule is the closure of many offices from 1 o'clock to 3 p.m. For the traditional Italian riposo or afternoon rest, parida practice increasingly abandoned in the fast-paced, modern Italian workplace, but still observed within the Vatican walls. As dawn approaches and the stars begin to fade from the sky above us, we can imagine the first employees arriving for the day, maintenance workers, preparing to clean the public areas before visitors arrive, Swiss guards changing shifts at their posts, kitchen staff beginning preparations for the day's meals in various Vatican dining facilities. The sounds of the waking Vatican are distinctive keys turning in ancient locks. The soft swish of clerical garments, whispered greetings in Italian or Latin, the distant rumble of delivery vehicles bringing supplies for the day's operations. These sounds have remained largely unchanged for centuries, a testament to the continuity that characterizes this unique place. Now, as the first pale light of dawn illuminates the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, let us consider one of the most fascinating aspects of Vatican operations, its media presence and communications strategy in the digital age. The Vatican's engagement with media has evolved dramatically over the centuries, from handwritten papal bulls in the Middle Ages to the establishment of Lo Sparta Romano newspaper in 1861. From the founding of Vatican Radio in 1931 to the launch of a Twitter account for Pope Benedict XVI in 2012, the Holy See has consistently sought to utilize available communication technologies to spread its message. Today, the Vatican's media operations are extensive. Vatican News provides multilingual content across various platforms. The Pope's social media accounts reach millions of followers. Live streams of PayPal events allow Catholics worldwide to participate virtually in significant ceremonies. This embrace of digital communication represents another fascinating paradox of the Vatican, an ancient institution leveraging cutting-edge technology, a traditional hierarchy engaging with the decentralized nature of social media, a center of formal Latin documents communicating through platforms limited to 280 characters. As the dawn light grows stronger, painting the travertine and marble facades with a warm golden glow, we can perceive the stirring of life within the Vatican museums, though they will not open to the public for several hours yet. Conservators and curators arrive early to perform necessary work away from the gaze of tourists. The preservation of the Vatican's artistic treasures represents one of the most integral significant functions of this sovereign entity. Masterpieces by Raphael, Michelangelo, Bernini, and countless others require constant monitoring and occasional intervention to protect them from the ravages of time, environmental factors, and the impact of millions of annual visitors. The work of Vatican conservators blends ancient craft traditions with modern scientific knowledge. Techniques passed down through generations of skilled artisans work alongside spectrographic analysis, climate control systems, and digital imaging technologies. This marriage of old and new, of tradition and innovation, characterizes much of how the Vatican functions in the modern world. As full daylight approaches and our night journey nears its conclusion, let us reflect on the profound paradoxes embodied in this remarkable microstate, the smallest sovereign nation in the world, yet the center of the largest religious organization on earth, ancient in its traditions, yet engaged with contemporary issues, materially limited, yet spiritually influential beyond measure. The Vatican defies easy categorization. It is neither a conventional nation-state, nor merely the headquarters of a religious denomination. It exists in a unique category of its own, a sovereign entity whose primary purpose is not territorial control or economic prosperity, but the preservation and promulgation of spiritual values. In an age dominated by secular power, metrics, military strength, economic output, technological advancement, the Vatican presents an alternative model of influence based on moral authority, cultural preservation, and spiritual guidance. Its very existence raises profound questions about the nature of sovereignty, the relationship between religious and secular authority, and the role of tradition in a rapidly changing world. As the sun rises fully over the eternal city, bathing St. Peter's Square in golden light, we conclude our nocturnal exploration of this fascinating place. The great bronze doors will soon open, allowing pilgrims and tourists to enter once again. The quiet we have experienced throughout the night will give way to the hum of thousands of voices echoing beneath the great dome. But we carry with us a deeper understanding of this remarkable place, not just as a tourist destination or a religious headquarters, but as a functioning sovereign entity that has survived the rise and fall of empires, the redrawing of Europe's maps to world wars, and the dramatic technological and social changes of modernity. The Vatican stands as a living paradox, a state defined by its smallness, yet global in its reach. Materially limited, yet artistically abundant, politically neutral, yet morally engaged, ancient in its traditions, yet constantly adapting to new realities. In a world increasingly defined by rapid change and disposable culture, it offers a different tempo, the slow, steady rhythm of an institution that thinks not in quarters or election cycles, but in centuries and millennia. As the morning light strengthens and the first visitors begin to queue at the entrances, let us shift our focus to examine more closely the Vatican's role as custodian of an artistic and architectural heritage of immeasurable value. St. Peter's Basilica, where our nocturnal journey began, represents perhaps the most visible manifestation of this custodial role. The current structure, begun in 1506 and completed over a century later, stands as one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements. Its dimensions alone inspire awe. The interior stretches 186 meters, 611 feet in length. The dome rises 136 meters, 447 feet from the floor to its highest point, and the main nave accommodates 20,000 worshippers. But beyond mere size, it is the artistic quality that truly distinguishes this sacred space. Bernini's baldachin, the bronze canopy over the papal altar, soars 29 meters, 95 feet high. Its twisted columns, an ornate decoration embodying the Baroque aesthetic at its most magnificent. Michelangelo's Peter, depicting the body of Christ in his mother's arms after the crucifixion, displays such technical mastery and emotional depth that visitors often stand before it in reverent silence, moved beyond words. Throughout the basilica, every surface seems to tell a story in marble inlay, in gilded decoration, in sculptural detail. What appears at first glance to be painted decoration reveals itself, upon closer inspection, to be intricate mosaic work, millions of tiny colored tiles, creating images of such detail that they can be mistaken for paintings. This technique was chosen specifically for its durability, ensuring these images would maintain their vibrant colors for centuries rather than darkening or fading as frescoes often do. The cool morning air within the basilica carries the faint scent of incense from early masses, mingling with the subtle mineral odor of ancient stone and the distinctive aroma of beeswax candles. Sunlight streams through the windows of the dome, creating shifting patterns of illumination that seem to bring the statues and decorations to life as the morning progresses. Beyond the basilica, the Vatican Museum's house, one of the world's greatest art collection's masterpieces, gathered over centuries by successive popes acting as patrons of the arts. The Raphael rooms, the Borgia apartment, the gallery of maps, the collection of modern religious art each represents a different facet of this extraordinary assemblage of human creativity. The famous spiral staircase, designed by Giuseppe Momo in 1932, with its double helix pattern allowing people to ascend and descend without meeting, exemplifies the Vatican's continued commitment to architectural innovation even in the modern era. The gentle sound of footsteps on this staircase, echoing in its central well, creates an acoustic experience as distinctive as its visual impact. As the morning advances and sunlight fills more of the museum corridors, the colors of the artworks take on new vibrancy, the rich blues and reds of Raphael's frescoes, the earthy tones of ancient Roman mosaics, the subtle gradations in Renaissance paintings. The preservation of these colors requires constant vigilance control of light exposure, humidity, air quality, and temperature, all managed by a staff of specialists whose work largely goes unnoticed by the thousands who pass through these galleries daily. Let us now turn our attention to one of the most famous and most frequently misunderstood aspects of Vatican governance, the Vatican Secret Archives, now officially renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archive to dispel some of the mysteries surrounding it, despite its previous name, which more accurately translates as private rather than secret. This repository is not the cache of forbidden knowledge depicted in fictional thrillers. Rather, it is an immense collection of documents, papal bulls, state papers, correspondence, account books accumulated over nearly 2 millennia of church history. The archive contains approximately 85 kilometers, 53 miles of shelving holding documents dating back to the 8th century. Among its treasures are the 60-meter-long scroll containing the proceedings of the trial of the Knights Templar, letters from Michelangelo regarding the construction of the Sistine Chapel, correspondence from Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis during the American Civil War, and countless other historical documents. Unlike the popular image of a forbidden repository, the archive is actually open to qualified researchers who can demonstrate a legitimate scholarly purpose. However, the sheer volume of material, much of it in Latin, medieval, Italian, or other historical languages, means that significant portions remain unstudied, awaiting scholars with the necessary linguistic and paleographic skills to decipher them. The preservation of these documents requires specialized knowledge and careful environmental control. The subtle scent of ancient paper and parchment permeates the archive rooms, where temperature and humidity are maintained at optimal levels to prevent deterioration. The soft rustle of turning pages and the occasional whispered consultation between researchers create a soundtrack of scholarly devotion as unique as the archive itself. As the morning advances toward noon, let us now explore one of the lesser-known but fascinating aspects of Vatican City, its gardens, which occupy approximately half of the microstate's total area. The Vatican Gardens, inaccessible to regular tourists until relatively recently, guided tours are now available with advance reservation, represent both a retreat for papal contemplation and a horticultural treasure. Dating back to medieval times, they combine formal Italian landscaping with English-style natural areas, creating a surprising oasis of greenery within the densely built environment of Rome. Ancient Roman sculptures, unearthed during various construction projects, stand among Renaissance fountains and carefully tended flower beds. The gardens contain rare plant species, some brought back from papal diplomatic journeys over the centuries. The gentle sound of water from the numerous fountains creates a soothing backdrop that has served as a respite for popes seeking temporary escape from the burdens of office. Within these gardens stands Vatican Radio's main transmission tower, a modern intrusion among the classical elements. Yet another example of how the Vatican continually integrates contemporary technology into its ancient setting. Nearby, the small Vatican helipad accommodates official visitors, arriving by air concession to modern transportation needs within this historically dense environment. The gardens also contain the Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest astronomical research institutions in the world. Though most of the observatory's research now takes place at its modern facility in Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer residence outside Rome. The Vatican's engagement with astronomical science dates back centuries and represents its commitment to the compatibility of faith and scientific inquiry. As noon approaches and the sun reaches its zenith, the gardens fill with the scent of Mediterranean plants, warmed by sunlight, rosemary, lavender, citrus trees, creating an olfactory experience as rich as the visual panorama. Birds sing in the ancient olive trees, seemingly oblivious to the fact that they nest within one of the world's most significant religious and cultural centers. Let us now turn our attention to an aspect of Vatican life that reveals much about how this microstate functions: its approach to security and border control. The borders of Vatican City are largely open, with no passport control at the main entrances to St. Peter's Square. Visitors can freely walk in and out of the territory, though access to many areas requires passing through security screening similar to that found at airports' metal detectors, X-ray machines for bags, and vigilant guards. This relatively open approach to borders reflects both practical necessity the Vatican welcomes millions of visitors annually and the spiritual mission of the Catholic Church, which emphasizes accessibility to the faithful. However, certain areas remain strictly controlled, accessible only to those with appropriate credentials or by special permission. The primary responsibility for Vatican security rests with several distinct entities. The Swiss Guard, as we have noted, protects the Pope and the Apostolic Palace. The Corps of Gendarmerie of Vatican City, a civilian police force, handles general security and law enforcement within the territory. The Vatican also works closely with Italian security services, as threats to the Vatican often involve Italian jurisdiction as well. Security concerns for the Vatican have evolved over the centuries, from medieval threats of invasion by rival Italian states to the 1981 assassination attempt against Pope John Paul II, from potential terrorist actions to modern cybersecurity challenges. Throughout these evolving threats, the Vatican has had to balance security needs with its fundamental commitment to openness and accessibility. As the midday sun casts short shadows across St. Peter's Square, we can observe the careful choreography of Vatican security, personalizable enough to provide reassurance, but discreet enough to maintain the spiritual atmosphere of the place. The occasional crackle of a security radio, the watchful eyes of plainclothes officers scanning the crowds, the CCTV cameras mounted discreetly on ancient buildings. All these represent the modern reality of protecting one of the world's most visited and symbolically significant locations. Let us now consider an aspect of Vatican functioning that touches directly on its global spiritual mission, the process of canonization, by which individuals are officially recognized as saints by the Catholic Church. This complex process, which has evolved over centuries, reflects the Vatican's role not just as a governmental entity, but as the administrative center of a worldwide religious organization. The careful steps of canonization, from initial investigation at the diocesan level to final declaration by the Pope, demonstrate the blend of spiritual discernment, historical research, and administrative procedure that characterizes much of how the Vatican operates. For a canonization process to begin, a local bishop must initiate an investigation of the candidate's life and virtues. This investigation produces a positio, detailed biography and case for sainthood, which is examined by the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, one of the departments of the Roman Curia based in the Vatican. If the investigation confirms the person lived a life of heroic virtue, the Pope may declare them venerable. The next step typically requires verification of a miracle, attributed to the candidate's intercession after death, usually a medical healing that defies scientific explanation. When confirmed, this leads to beatification and the title, blessed. A second verified miracle is generally required for canonization, the final step that formally declares the person a saint. Throughout this process, which often takes decades or even centuries, the Vatican serves as both investigator and judge, employing historians, theologians, and even skeptical medical experts, the so-called devil's advocate, to ensure the integrity of the proceedings. The administrative offices where these investigations are processed lie within the Vatican walls, rooms filled with dossiers documenting reported miracles, testimonies about candidates' lives, and extensive correspondence with dioceses worldwide. The work proceeds with methodical care, reflecting the seriousness with which the Church approaches the declaration of sainthood. As the afternoon advances and the light begins to soften, Let us now examine another distinctive aspect of Vatican operations, its judicial system, which includes some of the oldest continuously functioning courts in the world. The Vatican's legal system reflects its unique status as both a sovereign state and the administrative center of a global religious organization. It encompasses both civil law governing the territory of Vatican City and canon law, the internal legal system of the Catholic Church. The civil legal system of Vatican City is based primarily on Italian legal codes as they existed in 1929, when the Lateran Treaty established the modern Vatican State. Though it has been updated by laws issued by successive popes, the judicial power is exercised in the name of the Supreme Pontiff by the courts, with the Pope having full legislative, executive, and judicial power for civil and criminal matters within Vatican territory. There is a three-tiered court system: a sole judge court of first instance, a court of appeal, and a court of cassation. Given the small population and territory, these courts handle relatively few cases compared to those of larger nations, but they operate with all the formal procedures of sovereign judicial bodies. The canonical legal system, meanwhile, addresses matters of church governance and discipline. The Roman Rota serves as the highest appellate tribunal, primarily handling marriage annulment, cases referred from diocesan courts worldwide. The Apostolic Penitentiary deals with matters of conscience, including the lifting of excommunications and other ecclesiastical penalties. Perhaps the most widely known aspect of canonical judicial procedure is the sacrament of penance, confession, in which priests serve as judges in the internal forum, determining appropriate penance for sins confessed. While this takes place in churches worldwide, the principles governing it are established through Vatican authorities. The sound of distant church bells marks the passage of another hour as we contemplate these judicial functions. Another example of how the Vatican operates simultaneously as a modern sovereign entity and an ancient religious institution, blending temporal and spiritual authority in ways unique among nations. As the afternoon light casts longer shadows across the Vatican grounds, let us consider one of the most publicly visible aspects of papal governance: the issuing of encyclicals, apostolic letters, and other official documents through which the Pope communicates with the global Church and increasingly with the wider world. These documents represent a direct line of communication from the center of Catholic authority to the periphery, addressing matters ranging from theological doctrine to social justice, from liturgical practice to environmental concerns. The preparation of these texts involves careful drafting by Vatican officials, theological review, and translation into multiple languages before their official promulgation. The language of these documents has evolved over time. While Latin remains the official language of the Church and major documents are still issued in Latin, they are simultaneously released in various modern languages for immediate dissemination. The style, too, has changed from the formal, legalistic tone of earlier centuries to the more pastoral, accessible approach favored by recent popes. The physical production of these documents also reflects the blend of tradition and modernity that characterizes the Vatican. Once written on parchment with elaborate calligraphy and sealed with the papal ring, they are now typically drafted on computers, though still often signed by hand and sometimes accompanied by traditional elements such as the papal seal. These documents, once promulgated, become part of the vast corpus of church teaching, stored both physically in Vatican archives and digitally on Vatican websites. Another example of how ancient authority adapts to contemporary communication methods while maintaining continuity with traditions spanning to millennia. As the day begins to wane and afternoon transitions toward evening, Let us explore another fascinating aspect of Vatican operations, its approach to language and translation. A critical function for an entity that communicates with a global audience. Latin, as we have noted, remains the official language of the Catholic Church, used for authoritative versions of documents and for certain liturgical functions. Italian serves as the working language of daily Vatican operations. But the global nature of the Church requires translation capabilities covering dozens of languages. The Vatican employs a staff of translators who render papal addresses, official documents, and website content into major world languages. Papal audiences often feature simultaneous translation, with the Pope's words made accessible to visitors from around the world. During major events like Christmas and Easter blessings, the Pope himself delivers greetings in multiple languages, symbolic acknowledgement of the Church's universal nature. This multilingual approach extends to Vatican media operations, with Radio Vatican broadcasting in over 40 languages and the Vatican News website available in multiple language versions. The soft murmur of different languages being spoken by visitors and staff throughout the Vatican complex creates an auditory reminder of the global reach of this tiny state. As evening approaches and the sun begins to set, painting the travertine facades with warm golden light, we turn our attention to one of the most distinctive visual elements of Vatican life, the various forms of religious dress that distinguish different roles and ranks within the church hierarchy. The colorful uniforms of the Swiss Guard represent perhaps the most recognizable ceremonial attire. But the Vatican teems with other distinctive garments: the black cassock and red sash of a Monsignor, the purple of a bishop, the red of a cardinal, the white of the Pope himself. Each color, each element of these garments carries symbolic significance, often dating back centuries. The rustle of these garments, silk, wool, and cotton, moving through the corridors of power, creates another distinctive soundtrack of Vatican life. The visual impact of these traditional clothes against the backdrop of Renaissance and Baroque splendor reinforces the sense of historical continuity that permeates every aspect of this unique place. As darkness begins to fall once again and lights illuminate St. Peter's Dome against the deepening blue of the evening sky, we have completed a full cycle of our exploration of this remarkable microstate. From the quiet of midnight to the bustle of daytime operations, and now back toward the tranquility of evening. We have observed the many facets of how the world's smallest sovereign state functions. What becomes clear through this exploration is that the Vatican operates according to principles and priorities different from those of conventional nation-states. Its governance blends religious mission with practical administration, ancient tradition with necessary innovation, spiritual authority with temporal responsibility. In a world increasingly defined by economic metrics, military power, and technological advancement, the Vatican presents an alternative model of sovereignty based on moral and spiritual authority rather than material force. A governance focused on preservation of cultural heritage and promotion of ethical values rather than economic growth or territorial expansion. As the evening deepens and visitors thin out, leaving the great square increasingly empty, we can reflect on the profound paradoxes embodied in this tiny territory. A state without children or permanent citizens, yet concerned with the welfare of future generations. A government headed by an elected monarch who claims no hereditary right, yet traces his authority through an unbroken line of predecessors back to millennia. A political entity with minimal military or economic power, yet maintaining diplomatic relations with most of the world's nations. The sound of the evening Angelus bells rings out across the darkening square, daily ritual marking the transition from day to night. A sound that has echoed through these precincts for centuries. Lights come on in windows throughout the Vatican complex, indicating the continuing work of this unique sovereign entity even as tourist activities wind down. In these evening hours, as day gives way to night, we can perhaps best appreciate the dual nature of the Vatican's, simultaneously one of the world's most visited tourist destinations and one of its most private centers of governance, a place of spectacular public ceremonies and quiet administrative decision-making, a sovereign territory that exists primarily to support a spiritual mission transcending geographical boundaries. The cool evening air carries once again the scents we noticed at the beginning of our exploration: beeswax candles, ancient stone, the faint traces of incense. As darkness falls completely, the illuminated dome of St. Peter's becomes a beacon visible throughout much of Roma, fitting symbol for an institution that has often seen itself as a light in darkness, a beacon of spiritual values in a material world. Our journey through the Vatican, this fascinating fusion of church and state, of ancient tradition and modern function, of spiritual mission and temporal governance, comes full circle as night embraces once again the world's smallest sovereign state. But this tiny territory, as we have seen, contains multitudes, art and faith, history and hope, tradition and innovation, all coexisting within walls that have witnessed the unfolding of 2 millennia of human history. The paradox of the Vatican remains. How can something so small exert such enormous influence? How can an entity so ancient remain relevant in the modern world? How can a state with such minimal territory maintain such global presence? The answers lie in understanding that the Vatican's power derives not from conventional sources of state authority, but from its role as the physical manifestation of one of humanity's oldest continuous institutions, bridge between the temporal and the eternal, between earthly governance and spiritual aspiration. As night fully embraces the Vatican once more and the great square stands empty under the stars, we conclude our exploration with a deeper appreciation for this unique sovereign entity, a nation unlike any other, a governance model without parallel, a place where the weight of history and the immediacy of the present coexist in remarkable harmony. The Vatican, 44 hectares of territory containing 2 millennia of history, countless artistic masterpieces, and the administrative center of a global spiritual community. The smallest country in the world, yet one whose influence extends to the farthest corners of the earth. A paradox in stone and spirit, whose continuing existence defies conventional understanding of what constitutes a nation in the modern world. In the quiet of the night, as our journey ends where it began, the essential nature of this remarkable place becomes clear: not merely a sovereign state, not simply a religious headquarters, but a living symbol of the enduring human quest to bridge the material and the spiritual, to preserve the wisdom of the past while engaging the challenges of the present, to maintain an island of contemplative calm amidst the frenetic pace of contemporary life. The Vatican, the smallest country in the world, yet a universe unto itself,